So Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Gurudev, all glories to His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami Maharaj, and all glories to assembled Vaishnava devotees, Vaishnava devotees. Devotees, we are very much blessed and honored to have the presence of His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami Maharaj, who will be speaking to us from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the nectarian Srimad-Bhagavatam today. So, of course, Maharaj is not new here. He's been so generous, so kind to be with us. Oftentimes, he may have a very, very tight schedule, but he still tries to make it here. And Maharaj, we can't thank you enough for that. So without further ado, we may put the verse on the screen, and Maharaj, you take it over from here. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Nice to be with you again.
Hare Krishna.
Oh, there it is. Okay. So, okay, shall we read the Sanskrit?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Deva-dviṣāṁ nigama-vartmani niṣṭhitānāṁ pūrbhir mayena vihitābhir adṛśya-tūrbhiḥ lokān ghnatām mati-vimoham atipralobhaṁ veṣaṁ vidhāya bahu bhāṣyata aupadharmyam. And yeah. Let's go straight to the translation, since we're starting a bit late. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: when the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles. And Prabhupada's purport: this incarnation of Lord Buddha is not the same Buddha incarnation we have in the present history of mankind. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the Buddha incarnation mentioned in this verse appeared in a different Kali age. In the duration of life of one Manu, there are more than 72 Kali Yugas, and in one of them, the particular type of Buddha mentioned here would appear. Lord Buddha incarnates at a time when the people are most materialistic and preaches common sense religious principles. Such ahimsa is not a religious principle itself, but is an important quality for persons who are actually religious. It is a common sense religion because one is advised to do no harm to any other animal or living being, because such harmful actions are equally harmful to he who does the harm. But before learning these principles of nonviolence, one has to learn two other principles, namely to be humble and to be prideless. Unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent. And after being nonviolent, one has to learn tolerance and simplicity of living. One must offer respects to the great religious preachers and spiritual leaders, and also train the senses for controlled action, learning to be unattached to family and home, and enacting devotional service to the Lord, etc. At the ultimate stage, one has to accept the Lord and become his devotee. Otherwise, there is no in religious principles, there must be God in the center. Otherwise, simple moral instructions are merely sub-religious principles, generally known as upadharma, or nearness to religious principles. So, this chapter 7 of giving brief descriptions of the avatars. And one might wonder, why are we getting this again after we got it already brief listing in chapter 3 of Canto 1? Well, there's a general sense we get in the Bhagavatam that repetition is not a bad thing. And it's not just repetition, it's also expansion. Canto 1, chapter 3, as I remember, all of the verses are in the short anushtup form of 8 syllables per line. Whereas here in chapter 7, Canto 2, I believe they're all 14-syllable lines, which makes the verses a sharada tilaka meter. So the verses are longer, and that means they include more description. And unlike in the first canto, chapter 3, where each avatar is given just one verse of description, in this chapter, sometimes there's more than one verse. Sometimes it's 2 verses to describe one avatar. And when it comes to Lord Krishna, at the end of this chapter, there are 10 verses, if I remember correctly, 10 verses that are summarizing Krishna's pastimes when he appears in the world. So, yeah. So in the context of the description of avatars, we get this mention of Buddha, who is not mentioned by any name in the verse itself, but which we understand refers to Buddha. Why? Because Jiva Goswami tells us that. And also, I would suggest because it briefly, ever so briefly, echoes a quite detailed description in the Vishnu Purana, where Lord Vishnu agrees to the request of the demigods to help them when the Daityas have overwhelmed them. Vishnu agrees to help. And how is he going to help? By appearing as what's called the maya-mohan. He's also not referred to as Buddha, because in the Vishnu Purana description, there are 3 different groups that Lord Vishnu intentionally bewilders. the Buddhists, the Jains, and other materialists. So it seems to me that what we're getting here in this verse is kind of echoing that description. In the third line, it says, lokān ghnatāṁ mati-vimoham atipralobhaṁ. Mati-vimoham, bewildering the mind, and atipralobhaṁ, very attractive, veṣaṁ. He looks very attractive, and his veṣaṁ is mentioned. That's also somewhat echoing the Vishnu Purana version, which mentions, as I remember, that he dresses in a disguise with red cloth. When he's approaching some of the daityas, he preaches what's essentially a kind of, well, it's strictly speaking not Buddhism, but it's a kind of spoof on Buddhism, and same with Jainism and then other materialists. I did a study of that section of the Vishnu Purana several years ago, and I wrote an essay on that, analyzing it in quite some detail, because it has some interesting features, and I presented it at a conference, Indology conference, which is held every 3 years in Croatia, and it was, as they say, it was well received. Yeah, what Prabhupada is saying in the purport, of course, is what we might want to say is of most import for us in his explanation of how ahimsa specifically is the sub-religious principle referred to. In the Sanskrit of the verse, it says, bahu bhāṣyate aupadharmyam. Bahu bhāṣyate, he will say, or he will speak in so many ways, which you could say is a way of saying he will be speaking nonsense, which of course is very ironic. Here we have the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, and we generally understand if the Supreme Personality of Godhead speaks, he's speaking the absolute truth. And so there's no, he's not speaking ironically, he's speaking the truth as it is. But here he is taking on the position, the form of Buddha, and he's intentionally bewildering these persons who are described as deva-dviṣāṁ, as envious of the devotees. So again, in the purport, Prabhupada is identifying ahimsa as this upadharma. And as I remember, he speaks about this elsewhere as well. It would take me some time to see where that was, but he makes the point that a devotee will naturally be nonviolent. So the religious principle, of course, is Supreme Lord, and recognize means to take shelter of the Lord. Mata parataram nanya kinchidasti dhananjaya. Mayi sarvamidam protam sutre manigana iva. Recognizing that everything is depending on the Lord like so many pearls on a string. Or aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate. Everything is coming matta from me, Krishna says. And then iti matva bhavan, what is it? Iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. When one acknowledges that there is a Supreme Lord from whom everything is coming, then what is the natural thing to do? The natural thing is to then worship him, Buddha Bhava Samanvita, with great resolve, great determination. And so in this purport, Prabhupada says, it is a common sense religion because one is advised to do no harm to any other animal or living being. He's referring here to Buddhism as being a common sense religion, which is an interesting way of putting it. It's common sense. In other words, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence. And also, another way to understand that is it's not necessary to have a Vedic injunction of ahimsa because it's common sense. Everyone can understand. Of course, many times Srila Prabhupada, when speaking about Buddha, Lord Buddha, would make
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Since Marek is having connection difficulties, so we'll wait for a minute or so. And then Marek,
I'm back.
Yes, thank you, Marek.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I don't know how long I was cut off, but
about 30 seconds, not long.
okay. Yeah. So, yeah, Prabhupada explains that the Buddha's method of getting the Brahmins to stop Vedic sacrifice was to himself reject Veda altogether, because they would argue that we're just doing what it says in the Veda, in Vedic ritual texts. So Buddhadev would say, well, forget about the Vedas. Forget about the Veda and just listen to, actually the emphasis in Buddhism, from the bit of reading I've done of Buddhism, the emphasis is very much on experience and reason. That there is no acknowledgement of higher authority. There is simply one's own reasoning and one's own experience. Well, that's the theory. The only trouble is that there's a quite vast literature of Buddhist texts which are attributed to Shakyamuni Buddha that are taken as authoritative. So even though there's a notion that everything is the final decision is for oneself by one's own experience and one's own reasoning, still they have a massive literature, the entire Pali canon for the Theravada tradition, and then there's, I don't know how many different texts they have in the Mahayana tradition, which comes somewhat later and goes to China and so on. So anyway, Prabhupada is making this point mainly as his key point with relation to the Buddha as an avatar, that he is, in a sense, making an upaya, a technique for stopping people from committing violence to animals as they were doing, and of course, as they are doing. Much more now than ever before. We cannot even begin to imagine. There are websites which give data about numbers of animals killed. Faunalytics is one website you could find, and it's very disturbing information what's given there. Approximately 34,000 cows per hour globally are slaughtered. That's a statistic from, I think, a few years ago, so it's probably more now. Perhaps it would be interesting now, since ahimsa is found as a principle in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and much of what's in the Yoga Sutras can also be found in the Bhagavatam. Patanjali seems to have been himself a theist, and one devotee scholar has given reasons why it would be reasonable that he was a Vaishnava, but he might have been a Shaiva. But because he encourages what he calls Ishvara Pranidhan, which can be translated as simply worship of the Lord, he doesn't specify which Lord, because he wants his Yoga Sutras to be sort of non-sectarian. He wants them to be as widely accepted as possible. But he famously speaks or writes about Ashtanga Yoga, the eightfold yoga system. The first session, the first limb of which is yama, or restraint. And restraint, yama, consists of 5 principles, the first of which is ahimsa. And it's explained by the commentators on the Yoga Sutras, at least by a couple of the commentators, as I remember, that ahimsa is the foundation for the practice of yoga. It's a foundation for all the other 4 aspects of yama and the 5 aspects of niyama, or practices in particular. And so one could take, as I said, ahimsa can be seen as a foundation for yoga, but it can also be seen as the result of yoga. Srila Prabhupada emphasizing, we could say, with respect to bhakti yoga, the latter. It's a natural function from the practice of bhakti yoga. That, having said that, you may find it interesting, a couple of sutras in the Yoga Sutras I found very intriguing. After Patanjali explains about the yamas and niyamas very briefly. Then he goes into, he gives a very interesting hint about how to be successful in practicing ahimsa and so on. And this is how he does it. I'll just refer to two of his sutras. The first is a short one. It goes vitarka vadane pratipaksha bhavanam, which means upon being harassed by negative thoughts, one should cultivate counteracting thoughts, which is a very nice principle in general. Whenever we find some unappropriate thought coming to our mind, Patanjali is suggesting, first you recognize that that's what it is, and then step two, you consciously bring a counteracting thought, a pratipaksha bhavana. And then in the next sutra, which is somewhat longer, he gives some further detail of how to do that. And it goes like this, and I will read. It says, vitarka himsadaya krita karitanu modita lobha krodha moha purvaka mridu madhyadi matra dukkha jnana anantapala iti pratipaksha bhavanam. He's unpacking what is this process of pratipaksha bhavanam, and he's giving an example of a bad thought, a negative or a perverse thought. Specifically, what is that? Himsa. So one may have some thought of violence. So the translation of the sutra goes like this: negative thoughts are violence, etc. They may be personally performed on one's behalf by another, or authorized by oneself. They may be triggered by greed, anger, or delusion, and they may be slight, moderate, or extreme in intensity. One should cultivate counteracting thoughts, namely, that the end results of negative thoughts are ongoing suffering and ignorance. So in other words, every time we think of something that's, that's unfavorable, that's pratikula, that's unfavorable to devotional service, then what Patanjali is suggesting is immediately one should think of how much trouble that thinking is going to cause us. And then we can counteract with a positive thought. So, okay, that's a bit of practical application, we might say, from the yoga darshan. The yoga darshan is, in terms of its ultimate aim, not accepted by the Vaishnavas, because the yoga, at least as represented it in the Yoga Sutras, the ultimate aim is kaivalya, and kaivalya is generally translated as isolation. So it's, you could say, radically different from what devotees want. We don't want isolation. We want to be in the association of devotees. We want to be with Krishna, with all of his associates, and so on. However, the word kaivalya can be otherwise understood, and it's mentioned, as I remember, in the 11th canto. Don't ask me exactly where, I don't remember now. 11th canto, it's mentioned, and there it's understood in a devotional way as, pure devotion, basically. Kaivalya comes from the word kevala, which means only. So something like exclusive devotion. But anyway, so I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur who explains that Gaudiya Vaishnavas do not accept the yoga, classical yoga darshan soteriology, that is, what is their ultimate aim. We don't accept. However, there is still much that we can accept, we can appreciate in terms of the process of yoga, as described in, for example, Yoga Sutras, because, as I mentioned, practically all of what you'll find there, you'll also find in the Bhagavatam. You'll find mentioned, of course, very briefly, but also in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, alludes to several of the practices of Ashtanga Yoga and so on. Right, so that's a bit on yoga and ahimsa and Buddha. Maybe I should pause now and see if there are any questions, and otherwise I have something I could share with you, something I wrote which you may find interesting, but let's first pause and see if you have any comments or questions.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Maharaj. I just want to find out from the devotees, should Maharaj continue to share what Maharaj was talking about with us, or anybody who has a question you would want to ask?
Please continue, Maharaj, please, if that's okay with everyone.
Yes, that is okay with me too.
Okay.
Yes, so Maharaj, please, yes.
If there are no objections. Well, I just, a couple of hours ago, I dusted off, so to say, something I wrote with regard to teachings of Bhagavad Gita in relation to Buddhism. And I did this with a specific aim, which was to eventually publish something in China, which has been published. I can tell more about that if you like later, but we published a book called Advancing Across the Great River, and it's some introductory writing about the Bhagavad Gita. We were able to get it translated into Mandarin language, and it's a dual language book, which was legally published. That's not an easy thing to do for such a book in China. It was legally published by an academic press. So I wrote one article or essay or chapter for this book. Let's see, what did I give as the title? Here it is. Yeah, Bodhidharma's Four Entrances and the Bhagavad Gita, an exploration of Chan Buddhism through Vaishnava Hinduism. Okay, so Bodhidharma is an interesting personality. History has it that he was a Brahmin in South India, living in the 5th century of the Common Era. And in around 475 Common Era, he left India and went by boat, by ship, to southern China. And there he founded, essentially, a new form of Buddhism, a meditational form of Buddhism called Chan. We've all heard the word Zen Buddhism from Japan. So the word Chan became Zen in Japanese, and the word Chan is generally understood to be derived from the Sanskrit word dhyana, D-H-Y, long A-N-A, dhyana. So he's a kind of founder acharya of this Chan Buddhism, which became popular. Buddhism was already popular in China. It had been supported by emperors in China, and there were already so many temples and so many priests and so on. But there was a feeling that it had become too much institutionalized. And so when Bodhidharma came and began preaching his Chan Buddhism, that became very popular as a kind of protest against this sort of orthodox, what had become a kind of orthodox Buddhism in China. And there's an interesting legend about Bodhidharma, that after he died in China, 3 years later, he was seen walking in Western China toward India. And the story goes that he had a walking stick, and on the end of his walking stick, over his shoulder, was one shoe. And the idea is that he had one of his shoes that he had been buried with, and then they what's the word? They exhumed his body back where he had been buried in southeastern China, and they found there was only one shoe. In any case, the story is somehow he went back to India. So what I did in this article is I took this, what is apparently a famous writing of his. It's 4 very short practices that he describes. And then I give a sort of Vaishnava commentary on each of these 4 practices. So shall I read one of these?
Yes, Maharaj, please.
Okay, so here comes, first of all, Bodhidharma's first practice. It's called requiting injury, or suffering injustice. So Bodhidharma says, what is the practice of requiting injury? If the practitioner who is cultivating the path encounters suffering, he thinks to himself, quote, I, from the past, across innumerable eons, have become estranged from the root and followed after the branches, having flowed along in various existences, producing a great deal of ill will and hatred, antagonizing and harming others endlessly. Though there is no transgression on my part in the present, this suffering is the ripening of bad karma fruits of the faults of my past lives. It is something that neither the gods nor men have put upon me. With satisfaction, I will bear and accept it, with absolutely no ill will or complaining. The sutra, some unidentified sutra, says, quote, when you meet suffering, do not be sad. Why? Because you comprehend the underlying reason behind it, unquote. When this thought arises, one is yoked with principle. Taking ill will as an opportunity, one advances on the path, and therefore it is called the practice of requiting injury. Okay, so that's what Bodhidharma says. And to that, I say, Bodhidharma refers to the ripening of bad karma fruits as the source of our experiences of suffering. The notion of karma, literally action, as the basic mechanism of a moral universe within which all beings live, thrive, and suffer, has been widely accepted since early times in South Asia. What Bodhidharma offers here is an example of how one who practices meditation can best think about his or her experiences of trouble. Although we cannot remember specific events in our past, especially from past lives, the suggestion is that we do well to assume ourselves to be responsible for what we now receive. Having produced, quote, a great deal of ill will and hatred, antagonizing and harming others endlessly, unquote, it is no wonder that we suffer today, nor is there any reason to blame others for our present suffering. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's very first practical instruction to his student Arjuna is to practice tolerance of experiences characterized by duality, in particular heat and cold, or happiness and distress, knowing them to be transitory. This ideal of mental equanimity echoes throughout the Gita, and in chapter 6, which is specifically about meditation, Krishna brings the point to a deeper level when he says, quote, well-wisher, friend, enemy, stranger, neutral, inimical, relative, saint, and even sinner, in relation to all these, equal regard is prized. Significantly, it is immediately after this statement that Krishna begins to outline favorable details for practice of meditation, such as the importance of being situated alone, being free from desire, and making no claims of ownership. So much as Bodhidharma calls upon the meditator to first settle all issues or problems with other living beings, Krishna declares the need for a potential meditator to go beyond differences among living beings and beyond seeing others only in relation to one's own interests. Bodhidharma speaks of being yoked with principle, suggesting a relation to the Sanskrit word yoga. Yoga has a wide range of meanings, generally having to do with practice or discipline that brings about a condition of being yoked, an English cognate of yukta, which is a grammatical variant of yoga, to a higher truth or reality. The Bhagavad Gita is filled with references to yoga as disciplined spiritual practice, including a wide range of such practices, and with references to those who practice yoga, namely yogis. Again, as with the notion of karma, we have in this concept and word yoga an idea in wide circulation in South Asia. Further to note, and this is the last paragraph, further to note is Bodhidharma's admonition, taking ill will as an opportunity. Here we find a hint of what Vaishnava Hindu tradition will develop extensively on the basis of what we may call yogic reciprocity. We may find also a hint of this idea in the Gita's chapter 6, where the practitioner's mind is characterized as being his or her friend if it is subdued or conquered. When the mind serves one in the practice of meditation, one will recognize opportunities to, quote, advance on the path, unquote, in a situation of adversity, whereas one not accomplished in meditation will see only distraction. Moreover, even though the advanced meditator will not regard others as friends or enemies, he or she will be vigilant to bring about strong friendship with the mind. Also, we should note that although Arjuna is urged to rise above seeing friends and enemies, he is also ordered by Krishna to fight with fortitude in the ensuing battle with his cousins, and thus to fight for the good, for justice. And then I go on to Bodhidharma's second practice. So my aim in that whole essay is not to sort of bash Buddhism, but rather to make a sort of friendly approach. Buddhism, as I said, is very much established since well over close to 2,000 years in China. So better to make friends with him than to make enemies. Okay, that's I think that's pretty much what I would have to say. Going back maybe to the verse once more briefly, the translation. When the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya. Oops, I just have to move something. Okay. The Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles. So it's interesting, the translation indicates that this is future tense. And the idea, of course, being that this is an ongoing program. The Lord appears and he appears again in cycles. So Jiva Goswami can say, no, this is referring to a previous incarnation of Buddha. But in the verse it says, in the future he will appear. Well, it can go both ways, so to say, past and future. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, do you perchance have some of these articles on your website?
Oh, good question. I think I've been rather delinquent in making such things available. But good that you remind me. I should upload that.
Yeah, some of us would like to read it. It's nice hearing you read it, but I think it will be easier to be absorbed much
I know.
easier if we read it ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Maharaj. So devotees, does anyone have a question, comment? We wouldn't want to hold Maharaj a little much longer, but if someone has a question, comment, please, you're free to do that.
Looks like we have a quiet group today.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mitra, please. Go ahead.
Please take me in humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Maharaj. Thank you so much for being here.
Say.
The information you gave was, very insightful, and for some reason, seeing, our process of bhakti yoga and, when and how it's taught, in some ways, appeared to certain people to be different than what you read, but there's a lot of correlation, of course, because it's about connecting the soul. When we discuss ahimsa, there are, in some communications I've had with people, an understanding that even though it's violent, if it's done for the right reason, or for a reason that is perceived right, then it's okay. Would you please speak on that?
Oh, that can be a big subject. Well, we could agree with that, especially in the context of the Gita. We understand, of course, that Arjuna was being charged by Lord Krishna to fight, and fighting is pretty violent in a war. And this is where Prabhupada was always quite strongly rejecting Mahatma Gandhi's idea of allegorizing the Gita to the extent of saying that the main message of the Gita is ahimsa. It takes a bit of a stretch to make that conclusion. But of course, Prabhupada would say that Arjuna was thoroughly justified in his fighting in the battle. The whole Mahabharata, in effect, or much of the Mahabharata is giving the justification for the Pandavas to fight. And then it becomes a question, what constitutes justification? It also becomes a question, what constitutes himsa and what constitutes ahimsa? According to one source I read, technically speaking, the short a prefix on ahimsa does not necessarily mean an absolute canceling of himsa. That technically in the Sanskrit language, the negative particle can have a whole spectrum of meanings. Not something we usually hear about. Another possibly relevant point, it's been noticed by some scholars that there's another principle in the Mahabharata which is strongly praised, and that is anrishangsa. What is anrishangsa? It means non-cruelty. And so it can be argued, there's a difference between non-violence and non-cruelty. Some violence may be required in certain circumstances, depending how you interpret the word violence. Cruelty, it's generally, in some contexts, cruelty, non-cruelty can be more easily distinguished. But back to himsa and ahimsa, I think it may be interesting. And back to Gandhi, I wrote a paper about this also at one time, about Gandhi's animal theology, that one time there was I think it was a young calf on Gandhi's farm retreat center. He started 4 of them altogether. I think this was one in Gujarat. This calf had been seriously wounded. One of its legs was severely damaged, and it was clear that the leg could not be repaired. It would not be possible to heal. And so Gandhi ordered the calf to be shot. And he was criticized for that, but he defended himself. He said, no, in this context, this was nonviolence, because this animal would have was already suffering so much and would simply be suffering so much more. So he considered it to be not nonviolent, to as is said sort of euphemistically, to put the animal down. Yeah, those are a few thoughts. I don't know if that gets to what you're concerned about.
Yes, Maharaj, it does. Thank you so much for sharing so deeply. I look forward to your upcoming workshops on the subject matter.
Oh, am I doing a workshop on this subject?
I'm hoping so. Can I just add one little piece? I don't want to keep you any longer, but ahimsa, it seems to me ahimsa and the phrase para dukkha dukhi go together. How can we as aspiring Vaishnavas watch the suffering of others?
Right.
So I truly there's a core to the Sanskrit sound of it that is deeply compassionate, and thank you so much, Maharaj.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for bringing that up. Para dukkha dukhi it's a name, it's a term, you can say, for a devotee, one who suffers the suffering of others. So it's describing empathy. And of course, as you say, that links very nicely to and we could say that's the foundation of ahimsa for the devotee. Recognizing the suffering of others, feeling that suffering, naturally the devotee, as Prabhupada says, it's common sense, naturally the devotee will want to minimize or eliminate. And just a little blurb here, it comes to my mind, you all might be interested if you're not aware of it. There's a very nice seminar presented by Radhika Raman Prabhu recently at the San Jose temple. What do they call it? Anyway, the temple, their temple. He gave a seminar on engaged Vaishnavism. That's not exactly I think that's in the subtitle, but yeah, I don't have right with me the title, but it was a recent seminar, 3-part seminar, I believe. So he, in a very nice analytical way, shows how Vaishnavas are engaged in the world. It's not that Vaishnavas reject the world and simply act indifferent to the suffering of the world.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Maharaj. That's one devotee I really love to listen to, Radha Raman Prabhu. Very educated and very humble devotee. Srimad Bhagavatam Prabhu, please you may unmute.
Okay, Dandava Pranam Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to the assembled devotees. I'm driving, so please tolerate my sound at the background. Yeah, Maharaj, you just explained or cited, you just cited the Gandhi killing the calf that was suffering, and then the explanation he gave. So, I mean, this explanation is actually a polemic that is known as euthanasia, mercy killing.
Right.
So, would we accept Gandhi's explanation as a standard for the Vaishnavas? Or, I mean, in one sense, do we support mercy killing? Do Vaishnavas support euthanasia?
That's an interesting question. I've been asked that recently also. And I cannot say that I have a conclusive conclusion on that. I think the jury is out, and I think like many principles in Vaishnava ethics, it's a matter of desha kala patra. We tend to want sort of how to say, we tend to want rules which apply in all circumstances. That's kind of a Western, it's kind of a Western thing, actually. Kantian ethics and so on. Well, I guess you could say it goes back to Aristotle. But my sense is it's very much time and circumstances. And with regard to animals, I was speaking with one devotee who cares for cows in one of the ISKCON Goshalas. I won't say where. And he said, I think it was kind of his private experience or his feeling from his experience with cows. He said he felt that when a cow, due to old age or sickness, when it comes to the point that the cow will no longer eat or drink, he feels that is a time when it would be justified to do euthanasia. I don't know. That's one way of understanding. Some would say no. The person, the animal, has to play out their entire karma, whatever it is. So yeah. So I have mixed feelings about that.
Hare Krishna.
A follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Maharaj, because you have given an inconclusive answer, so I would like to give an argument against euthanasia, which can be very convincing on the Vaishnava Siddhanta, where according to our Siddhanta, each entity, living being, has a prescribed time to use in a body. And our argument for not killing them is that we are depriving them from fulfilling that time span, and then they have to come back again to complete it. So the same argument is used against euthanasia, that if the time allotted to that soul to stay in that body has not yet expired, and you, in the name of mercy, put an end to that body, then it is you've acted against the law of karma. So how do you see that?
No, that's kind of what I was suggesting, essentially. No, I think it's certainly a valid point and has to be considered seriously. But yeah, I don't want to commit myself one way or the other.
Yes. Well, Maharaj, I think your stance is well appreciated. But I have a counter opinion, because actually I was going to ask this same question about euthanasia based on Mahatma Gandhi's stance on that wounded calf.
Yeah.
One is, well, we are human beings, and each and every one is allotted a specific time to live in a particular body. But because we are devotees, and Mother Mitravinda talked about Paraduka Duki, that is the basis of a devotee. That is the being. What makes a devotee is that he just cannot stand seeing another entity suffering. And so, by the power of devotional service, we have great devotees who perform animal sacrifices. And when they perform animal sacrifices, they're killing the animals. They're ending the animals' life earlier than allotted to them by Lord Brahma. But what happens? They attain higher bodies. And so my argument will be that, just like Maharaj, you earlier on said, it depends on the time and the circumstance. If the devotee seeing this animal suffering to a point that from humanly calculation, there is no possibility of this animal surviving, and you just looking on how this animal is suffering, then that mercy killing may be okay. This is just my argument, because one, it's just like, especially in the US here, we have these politicians who are debating over abortion, that there's some wing say that under no circumstance should a woman have abortion. And the other wing says that, yes, we also do not want abortion, but due to circumstances, abortion may be allowed. So if we go by what my dear brother was saying, His Grace Varaha Prabhu was saying, then under no circumstance should abortion be ever allowed to take place. But sometimes it is a necessity that the mother gets abortion, because if she doesn't, she is going to lose her life. The fetus is going to lose its life. So would you prefer to save one life and lose one, or try to save one and lose both? So that would be a very nice debate I would like to participate in.
You're stirring up all the coals of the fire.
All right. Thank you. I see, Governor Prabhu, you have something to share.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj, thank you very much for your explanation to this ahimsa. You've given us a very broad explanation, because normally when you say ahimsa, most of us refer that to be the killing of the animals. But you made us understand clearly that ahimsa, we can also be ahimsa to our own.
What happened?
think
Oh,
we lost.
yeah, he touched what he was not supposed to touch. So he kicked himself out, but he will come back. He will come back, definitely. Yes. Srimad Prabhu, do you still have your hand up? Or okay, Govinda Prabhu is back.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Apparently not.
Yes.
I don't think-
Yes. Hare Krishna.
Okay, yeah.
Hare Krishna. Yes.
Hare Krishna, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, you see, I'm just thinking that we've already caused harm to ourselves, and that is a very great ahimsa to our soul for identifying ourselves with the body, and therefore doing all kind of things that satisfy the body and keep the soul imprisonment. And that's a great ahimsa that we cause to ourselves. And so that anything that will oppose our advancement to our Krishna consciousness or the development of consciousness of Krishna, that can be ahimsa. So I have this clear understanding from your presentation today, Maharaj. Thank you very much. And concerning this argument, I would also say that when we think of the evolution that the soul goes through, especially when one descends to an animal form, it has to go through so many lifetimes, so many bodies before finally it becomes a human being and maybe get a chance to participate again in Krishna consciousness. And so if a sacrifice is performed for these animals to have a human form or to have a higher form of life, can that be considered ahimsa? For instance, like you're saying, the animal is sick, and we all know that it cannot survive. So instead of looking at this animal to die naturally, we have compassion for this animal to take its life. And if that is ahimsa, then compare that to leaving this animal to have its natural death and go through millions of lifetimes, millions of bodies before finally coming to a human platform. Which one is ahimsa?
Well, okay, both of you have brought up the subject of ritual sacrifice, and I think in a way that whole area is kind of a moot question because we understand that there are anyway no qualified priests in the present age to do such sacrifices, and therefore they're forbidden. One could discuss about it in another age, another yuga, I suppose. But also, historically speaking, because I've read a bit on the history of the term ahimsa, as it's been studied by some Indologists, and they say this word ahimsa came up out of the practice of sacrifice when it was determined that maybe we shouldn't be physically killing animals. Maybe we should be making some substitute for the animal. We need to do the ritual. There's this idea in Vedic ritual that it's absolute, it must be done. But how do we do it? There's equally a tradition of substitution, all kinds of substitution. And so, as I remember reading, this was where the idea of ahimsa came in. The sacrifice must go on, but can we do it without killing animals? Anyway, it's a big topic.
Srimad-Bhagavatam Prabhu, please let me unmute.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. So Sahadev Prabhu kind of tried to counteract by bringing him the question of or the subject of abortion.
Yeah.
But there are two different subjects. Abortion is nullifying the result of your own action. You invite the child to your sexual intercourse. Or even if it is a rape, you want to nullify the result of an action. So is that justified? That's the question. That's the big question about abortion. Can you deliberately nullify the concomitant result of your action? That is one. No. I'm not arguing. I'm just putting my point across. And then the second one, which is the mercy killing, euthanasia, is what you call a mercy. Your own, we may say mercy. There is that story of misplaced compassion. The child who wanted to help the butterfly come out of the cocoon, seeing the what is it called, caterpillar struggling, and then he put a knife across the cocoon to get it out, and then the butterfly dropped and he couldn't fly and died. Now the struggle, just like the Buddhist philosophy, the suffering and the struggle is meant for, it has a goal, a purpose to be achieved through that suffering. So if the caterpillar had been allowed to go through the natural process of squeezing itself throughout the cocoon, then the fluid in its stomach will descend, and then it will not come out with a bloated stomach, because when the child cuts through the cocoon, the flattening of the stomach was prevented. And then what he was trying to do, like a compassion, being compassionate, ended up to being a misplaced compassion. So trying to do violence or killing, which is not in any way given to us. We have no right over life and death. We are not like somewhere Prabhupada said, those who are given the right over natural matters like the sun, the moon. I mean, those who have control over natural forces. We do not, and we cannot take that into our hand to decide the death of somebody else. So that is my point. There's a difference between wanting to nullify the result of an action and wanting to show compassion, which may be a misplaced compassion because you do not see the whole result of what is happening. Thank you, Maharaj, for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Okay.
Well, Maharaj, I'm sorry if I may say something in regards to my big brother's comment, because I think if we look at it, or if we consider it from the viewpoint of what Srimad-Bhagavatam Prabhu is saying, then yes, it will be wrong if someone is pregnant based on her own decision of becoming pregnant, and then later on she decides to abort, then that is very wrong. But just like Mahatma Gandhi did, this calf was suffering to a point that from humanly calculation, there was no way this calf is going to get better and live. It's just going to suffer, and eventually die. And so when a woman becomes pregnant and congenitally has a problem, that is going to kill the fetus. And when the fetus dies, the woman is also going to die. This has been considered by medical experts. And if they come up with a conclusion that if the fetus is aborted, then the mother's health is going to be intact. So that is not the same as someone just becoming pregnant out of lust and wanting to abort the fetus. That is a different story, but it's a medical condition which is putting both the fetus and the mother at risk. And experts are saying that if the fetus is aborted, which has maybe less than 1% chance of surviving, that would save the mother's life. That is what I'm talking about. So that, I believe, falls in line with euthanasia, in the sense that you just do not want to see this animal or this person go through so much pain and no chance. We say no chance because even though we are not the Supreme Lord, but from our calculation, we can say that this is this, that is this. So that is where I was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get this completely resolved on this meeting. But it's nice. Of course, we discuss everything.
Yeah, maybe that is something we can have, maybe an in-service or some sort of.
I've also written one article many years ago on abortion, which I wrote for a course that I was attending at university.
Okay.
And I got an A+ on it. I was happy for that.
Oh, Maharaj, you would like to read that also. Yeah. Because I remember one time I wrote an essay on abortion and I had an F because yes, the instructor specifically warned all the students never to write abortion. That is too complicated. So, but I didn't hear the instructor say that, so I wrote on abortion. And whether my argument was good or not, she didn't even consider it at all. She gave me F right away.
Oh. Okay.
So if we may go to Hare Chakra Prabhu, please, Hare Chakra Prabhu, you may unmute.
Maybe we can keep it short because...
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Accept my obeisances. All glory to you, all glory to all part, and all glory to the assembled devotees. Maharaj, I want a little bit clarification because this topic we are talking about, and my argument is when we say someone karma, like a lot of devotees, they will meet someone in town, and the person is a beggar, asking for something to get something to eat. And some devotees conclude that, oh, it is his karma. So they will just pass by the person and go away. So my understanding is that if somebody has a karma, it is also, I understand that it is also part of his karma to come in contact with you when you meet the person. So don't we have to deliberate or think and ask ourselves, what is the part that we have to play in his or her karma at that material moment? So if we refuse to play the part that we are supposed to play in the karma of the person, aren't we incurring sinful activity or something by refusing to perform our part of the person's karma?
Yeah.
So this issue we are talking about, if an animal is in a difficult situation and it's suffering, we know that it's the karma of the animal that is going through that. But we being materially present at that moment, doesn't it also show that we have to play some part in the karma of that animal at that material time?
Yeah.
And if so, don't we have the right to make a compassionate decision on behalf of such an entity? So this is my question.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. This is something that I mentioned before, Radhikaraman Prabhu's seminar, and this is a point which he makes near the end of his seminar. He brings this very close to what you're saying. He brings this in about karma. So, yeah, I'm kind of watching the clock, so I don't want to go on and on with this, but your point of being related with another person's karma is well taken. In the Roman Catholic Christian tradition, they have the notion of sins of commission and sins of omission.
Mm-hmm.
That you can, by doing something, we would use the word karma, you get some karma, or by not doing something, you may get karma.
Yeah.
So that brings in the point of responsibility.
Yeah.
Which I understand responsibility to be responsibility, the ability to respond.
Mm-hmm.
How do we respond? This, I think, is very much a matter of time, place, circumstance, and guidance, sadhu shastra guru vakya.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Maharaj. The class was originally sweet because the Srimad-Bhagavatam now it's become sweeter and sweeter. You know, when you're eating something sweet, you just don't let go of it. But we have to, because Maharaj has to move on. So Maharaj, we are very much thankful and grateful that you were able to be here with us and give us your love, your blessings, and wisdom. And
thanks to you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Maharaj. It was so beautiful meeting you in person in Gita Nagari also. So
yeah, for me, that was a real treat to be there.
Yeah.
Radha Damodar ki jai.
Jai. There were requested that you try to make it annually. So we'll see.
Well, let's see.
Yes, okay. So dear devotees, we're going to humbly request you all to kindly unmute, and we all chant the sweetest Hare Krishna Mahamantra to express our appreciation to our revered speaker, His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami Maharaj. Please. Jai.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Vanchata All glories to Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami Maharaj ki jai.